For those of us that are not pet stewards, how do we appropriately address our loved ones who are pet stewards who constantly dump the burden of obligations and responsibilities of pet stewardship onto others? That is, how do we respectfully remind them that pet stewardship is not just the pleasure of companionship for them to enjoy, but also the pain of daily maintenance for them to bear?
Now, don't we see this all the time where, of course, the kid wants to bring a dog home because it's so cute and cuddly and I'll love it. I promise I'll clean up after it. I'll feed it. I'll do everything. And then 4 days later, 4 weeks later, 4 months later, it's like, it's a fixture in the house and I do enjoy petting it, but I don't want to take care of it really. And we don't think about all the resources it takes besides money. It takes time and attention and energy.
Not to mention that a dog is, you basically have a 2 to 3 year old toddler the entire life. That's the phase that they are in. They have to be maintained in that 2 to 3 year old. I mean, they're very high maintenance their whole life. So while we may fall in love with the concept of becoming a best friend to an animal, we may not think through the time and energy and emotional commitment, financial resources that it takes to give that animal the quality of life that it needs and deserves for its entire lifespan. So as a proactive wellness veterinarian, I have to say that pre-purchase or pre-adoption counseling is like the most important thing for marital relations, for household peace, that adopting an animal cannot be a whim. It has to be the same level and weight as adopting a child in the sense that you would plan about it, you would talk about it. Do you have the resources? Do you have the time available? Who exactly will be caring for the animal for the next 15 years? Who exactly will be walking the animal? And if you haven't seen the level of commitment and responsibility be role modeled in your spouse or your mate or your kids yet, then I would say don't get a German Shepherd puppy, because you haven't yet had the relationship dynamic unfold with a child or a spouse enough for you to know, you know what, I feel like this could all end up on me. And if you're cool with that ending up on you, awesome. If you're not cool, then first and foremost, I would say preemptively before you bring life into your home and then have that life be stressful or a source of family conflict, you've got to make sure that the entire family recognizes the roles and responsibility of the weight of what it takes to responsibly care for that animal for the duration of its life. If you come into a relationship and your girlfriend has a puppy or your boyfriend has a dog or a cat, and now you are marrying into that, there again, you would want, before you decide to take that on, you would want to say, hey, listen, if we're going to spend our life together, are you going to continue caring for this animal? You know, whose responsibility will this be?
Yeah, we were talking about that before we started recording. When I met my wife, our daughter was 1 year old. She's my stepdaughter. I treat her like she's my daughter. But you have to be all the way in with that, too. Like if you start dating someone, you're going to move in together, but I hate dogs. Well, you're going to be miserable, or you're going to have to find a way to stop hating dogs, right?
That's right.
So when I met Mariah, she had a cat, and we were looking for an apartment to move in together. And let me tell you, when you have a cat, it cuts out like 50 to 60% of the available apartments. So there were some like really nice places where I'm like, you know, good location, yada, 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 no pets. And so I go to Mariah, my now wife, I'm like, is there any way we could just like maybe find this cat another home? And she's like, no. She's like, this is the whole package. And
I tried the same thing with Ella. Can we just
and you know, but you know, it was a very it wasn't something that I let, you know, bother me. It was like she just kind of helped me see like, oh, this is part of the package. So I was like totally willing to accept that. And now I would like never get rid of this cat. Like I am now bonded to this cat. So yeah, I totally agree. It's like it's a whole package type deal for sure.
But you have a weird sort of situation here, and Alabama can testify to this because she will cat sit for you from time to time. But your cat Mac,
yes,
I've known you for 30 years. I've seen Mac twice ever.
Right. He is.
You go to the house. He wants to be in the same room with you, but he doesn't want you to make eye contact or.
He's a barn cat. He's feral. He's like very standoffish,
independent.
Yes.
Yes.
And he's come from generations of barn cats.
You bet.
So there is like a little feral aspect. Even when he hears something, the way his ears perk up, I'm like, oh, that looks like a bobcat.
Mhm.
which like most cats, like domesticated, they're floppy and yeah. So he's tame, but I don't think he's so domesticated per se. But what I did, so yeah, to become Mac's friend, just like with any animal, you give it food.
There you go.
So Mac was he was a pretty fit, young, strapping cat when he first entered my life. About 2 or 3 years into it, he gained a little bit of weight. Mainly because I was like feeding him, like we give him cat food, but then I would give him like just little bits of like lunch meat, ham or turkey, which like, he absolutely loves. So it totally worked. Like him and I are now bonded, but I have stopped since like feeding him lunch meat. Like, cause and you correct.
You shouldn't be eating lunch meat.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, my wife, she was trying to explain to me, she's like, look, when you give, and correct me if I'm wrong, or if she's wrong, when you give a cat like a little piece of meat, like for them, it's actually like kind of a bigger thing because of, how small they are. And not to mention, the salt and all the processed stuff. Yeah.
I mean, that's such an awesome question. And that's, I'm guilty of it too, right? Buying my love, right? I mean, that's how relationships start between boyfriends and girlfriends, right? Just start taking, your girlfriend out to like beautiful restaurants and you bond over food. I mean, food is like one of the most incredible bonding experiences in the world. And I too am guilty of it. And especially in the pet space, you always want to, you feed with love, right? Especially coming from a Mediterranean family. My God, like, we were always like, if you didn't finish your plates, you were beaten. So you were, and you fed with love, right? You just always got to keep handing out treats and so on and so forth. We were really, especially when it comes to cats, right? The type of food, I personally don't think there's anything wrong with that bond, sharing food. I know sometimes you got trainers that say, don't feed them at the table and they can develop terrible sort of, begging at the table and so on and so forth. So, I mean, look, putting that aside, it's kind of like the perception of food. Like, what am I sharing with my pet? And ultimately, there's things that I can pull out of my refrigerator, share with my pet, that's going to benefit me and benefit my pet overall. Lunch meats, delicious, right? Made in Italy. They're prepared differently in Italy than they are, right?
He perks up so quick when he sees a lunch meat.
Right?
He's like,
so I guess it's really going to depend on sort of like the lunch meat itself, because of course we know that some of these meats can have like the sodium nitrate, and the World Health Organization steps in and says eating that stuff could increase your rate of cancer and so on and so forth. And because they're so small, like the load of sodium nitrate that you would be taking in versus your cat would be taking in would be exponential. So there'd be nothing wrong if I was sharing, let's say, an organic piece of like chicken, or like free range beef or something like that with my pet. So that's important, because one of the challenges that we know is that not only do pets, do they mimic us like when it comes to stresses and so on and so forth, but they also mimic our disease rates. So, I know that there's like an obesity rate right now globally, right? And it doesn't matter where it is. And don't quote me on the statistics in America, but I believe the last time I saw the human obesity rate was, and overweight was like around 50%. It holds true with cats and dogs. They mirror us, right? Yeah. And when we eat, we typically feed our pets. And I know multiple studies have come out to say that overweight, and not in anyone else, not a lot of people that are listening, because I don't want to get offended with me, but research shows that a lot of overweight pets come from overweight families, right? Because it's that stop point, right? Yeah. And then what is the perception of food that we're seeing? Because to some people, sharing table scraps, this is kind of what was our biggest hurdle in writing the book, that term table scraps, right? It was a term that was like developed in like 1890, where the invention of the first sort of ultra processed food, where some genius named James Spratt from America was like, hey man, maybe I can make like pet food and I can make this very convenient, but how do I get people to stop feeding foods? Well, let's vilify the term table scraps, because what on earth were people feeding before 1890 to their pets? Like, what did pets
Real
been eating
food.
their whole lives?
Yeah.
Real food, right?
And we would use a pejorative like table scraps to ruin that real food.
100%. And so, that still holds true today. You walk into your veterinarian like, hey man, watch out on those table scraps, my friend, right? Because what is the definition of table scraps? It's never been clarified. Every home is different. Maybe, I see dudes sometimes giving their dogs like a little bit of beer and wine and stuff. Like, I mean, it's like, what are you doing, right? Or getting cats to like, eating nachos and stuff like that. So there are those people, like those caveats, you know what I mean? Like those caveats have to be there on what you're sharing. What are those table scraps? But if the food is healthy, if the food is what you would feed your children, what you'd feed an infant, a 1-year-old, and you'd feel comfortable with, I believe those are the type of foods that you should be sharing with your pet.
Yeah. Well, and animals, most of them go through life never getting any fresh food. So the fact that we can open up our fridge and share fresh foods with our dogs and cats, it's the only time that they get foods that contain enzymes and that have not been adulterated and that still have nutrients and polyphenols and antioxidants included.
Yeah.
So sharing what I call biologically appropriate treats with your cat is fantastic. But we also have to think about why and when we treat animals. Oftentimes, we're working 10-hour days, we're stressed out, we haven't given the time and attention to our pets. So you know what we do? We treat them instead of spending time with them, instead of being present and focusing
it's like a
on
shortcut
them.
to bonding.
Yeah, it's like, here, just eat. You just keep having
My
a snack.
grandmother, yeah.
Yeah. So snacks, emotional bonding can't be done with just overfeeding your pet. We end up with a lot of fat diabetic cats, and we end up with a lot of kitties with kidney disease and organ disease. And we don't necessarily, we're not nourishing them the way nature intended. So kitties and dogs actually don't have a carbohydrate requirement. They don't need any carbs to be healthy.
Oh, wow.
And yet the
In
average
fact,
bag
cats don't eat plants at all, unless they're in like strange starvation situation. And even then, they don't have the digestive tract to really.
Yeah, they'll nibble grasses, of course, and they rely on getting the plant material inside of their prey's GI tract that's passed up the food chain, those pre-digested prebiotic fibers that come from their prey's GI tract. Like if you really had a barn cat, barn kitties hunt mice regularly, and they eat the whole darn mouse.
Right.
They're not cooking it, they're not removing the bone and the skin, they're eating the whole mouse, and they're eating the mouse microbiome, they're eating all the mouse organs, they're eating everything. And that fresh, whole, live packaged meal contains everything that nature intended for him to be thriving in a metabolic machinery state that allows him to live a long, healthy life. The problem is cat food doesn't have those same macronutrients.
Did you enjoy this standalone Patreon highlight? If so, you can listen to full episodes of the Minimalist Private Podcast, available exclusively on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/theminimalists or click the link in the description. Your support keeps our podcast and YouTube channel 100% advertisement free.